Now the block in phase is pretty quick. Really, there is nothing special or fancy about this phase. All we're doing is saying, okay, we now have a large canvas, we have clean line work, but we don't have any paint. So it's really pretty straightforward. We're just taking the final result of the tones that we figured out in the rough process, and then we are, opening up our clean line work and just giving ourselves a base coat that now represents the new cleaned up composition. Really, it's just transferring small to big. And there's a variety of different ways to do this, and you are going to pick your own method, I'm sure. So I'll just talk about kind of two ways that I like to approach it. The first way is just starting from scratch. There are definitely times when in the process of cleaning up your lines that you're going to end up with some different shapes. The notable thing here in mine is that my biker is a different pose than he was in my thumbnail. And the bike itself just has a lot more details. Another area that you really might need to do this for is if your perspective had a lot of problems, and then when you got your perspective grid out and you fix those problems, now your two images don't really line up. So for whatever reason, if you decide I need to start from scratch, what you need to do is just fill the canvas with paint. Now, how many layers you use, that's totally up to you. But for me, this is an awesome opportunity to use those paths. Because if I have the paths, I can control click and immediately pull up selections, which just means that filling these areas with paint is very easy. Because really the hardest part about the block in is your edges. It's making sure you have a clean separation between foreground and background, or character and environment, whatever it might be. And if you have a quick way to pull up those selections, it just makes the whole thing easier. So in the case of this painting, I'm really only going to have the character in its own totally separate group, and then I'm going to have the environment be pretty flat. And the reason I'm able to work that way is because I know I can pull those selections back up at any moment from my paths. Now, if you don't want to start from scratch, if you have a pretty similar rough compared to your final lines, the way you can actually do it is just to bring your smaller document into your final lines, stretch it out, enlarge it, and make sure they pretty much line up, and then just start fixing the edges. Because when you enlarge an image, it's going to get fuzzy, and maybe your image was sloppy to begin with. But really the only place that that's going to be evident are on the edges. So if you can clean up your edges and make them sharp, the rest of it will actually look kind of nice. Sometimes actually enlarging brushstrokes makes them look nice and painterly. So here you see really all I'm doing is cleaning up. And again, this is a nice opportunity to use my paths, because if I want to sharpen up an edge, it's nice to be able to select the object itself, paint inside it, and then invert the selection and paint in the background. And so in this way, even on a single layer, I can have a nice clean edge without having to work too carefully. Really, it's the paths that are doing all the work. So setting up those shapes in the first place is now saving me time. But really, this is all about just getting paint on the canvas and having clean edges. But once I've got all the canvas filled with paint and the tones generally match the tones in my rough, I'm going to move on to the next phase.